ABC News, straightforward.
I get locked down, but I get up again. The world's most famous anonymous artist, Banksy, spreading his unique message in the London Tube, taking to the trains overnight to remind us all of the strange times we're living in. Record-breaking rise in cases across the South and West, Texas and Arizona, with a staggering new number of infections tonight. A field hospital now being set up at the convention center in Austin. The latest major cities to announce schools will be opening online only. And Ohio now expected to roll back its reopening plans. The new reporting from the front lines. Hundreds of healthcare workers dying across the U.S. after being exposed to the virus. We'll have an up-close look. Pushing back, Dr. Anthony Fauci calls the attacks on him from members of the president's team, quote, bizarre, after one of Trump's top aides accused Fauci of being, quote, wrong about everything. The latest from the White House. And we'll also talk with one of the president's most determined supporters in Congress, Representative Matt Gaetz, tonight. The deadly police encounter, 2 officers now charged with murder, accused of shooting a man with a stun gun more than 50 times. Fight over a mask that ended with a deadly police confrontation. The suspect holding a knife, charging at the officer. Tonight, the new fears that mandatory mask orders may spur further violence, while the CDC chief says if people would only wear masks, the outbreak could be under control in 1 to 2 months. And the future of meat, how sustainability is tasting these days. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for streaming with us. I'm Lindsay Davis. The United States is now approaching 3.5 million coronavirus infections, making us the only high-income country in the world where the virus is spreading so rapidly. Cases are now on the rise in 41 states, yet many Americans are still pushing back, including some right in our leadership, reluctant to follow the guidance recommended by health officials. Today, Oklahoma's Governor Kevin Stitt says he does not see any reason to make mask wearing mandatory, and this was after he even admitted himself that today he tested positive for COVID-19. Meanwhile, fellow Republican Governor Kay Ivey of Alabama has issued a statewide mask order saying, quote, the data over the past few weeks is definitely trending in the wrong direction. Walmart has now announced that masks will be mandatory at all of its stores nationwide. In Florida, there are now more than 300,000 cases statewide, and our Victor Akendo is there tonight and leads us off.
Miami is now being called the epicenter of a national crisis, where hospitals are filling up. Statewide, 56 ICUs are at capacity. Inside this warehouse, a daily rush to get supplies to those on the front lines.
This is Miami-Dade County's PPE supply. Boxes of face shields behind me. There are gowns here. Down this row, you have masks and gloves. These supplies, they come in and out daily.
I don't think there's ever enough at this point because we don't know what the conditions are going to bring to us.
If things don't improve dramatically over the next week, we could be forced to take very dramatic measures like reinstituting a stay-at-home order.
With cases surging, schools here in South Florida won't reopen for now. But teacher Stephanie Miller worries she needs her health insurance. After spending 21 days on a ventilator with COVID-19, she's now in rehab.
We're afraid of going back and catching it. Our immune systems are low as it is. We catch every flu the kids have. So we're very susceptible to COVID.
Schools in San Francisco and Houston also planning to start the year online. And tonight, help is on the way for Houston doctors and nurses caring for thousands of patients. The Army setting up a new COVID ward to ease the burden. Months after we saw those refrigerated trucks outside a New York hospital, Texas counties now getting them ready as morgues fill up.
It's a hard thing to talk about, people's loved ones who are dying, but in the hospital, there are only so many places to put bodies of the loved ones, and we're out of space.
In California, our Matt Gutman spoke to Misty Diaz. Last night, she and her brothers said goodbye to their father.
His nurse was just straight up with us. There is nothing that we can do. And I called my dad via like a video conference thing that they have. And I talked to him for about 30 minutes, and we each took our turn. I didn't think he would go out this way, Matt. Not this way.
Her father was there for her 28 spina bifida surgeries, but Jose Pinales died this morning.
Never him. Maybe me, but never him.
The 62-year-old had been in the ICU with COVID for more than 2 weeks, a journey Misty's been documenting on social media, this wordless video going viral. Misty is now using her platform to plead with people to wear a mask. The death rate now climbing in 25 states, half the country. In Oklahoma, where cases are soaring, the governor today revealing he too has COVID.
I got tested yesterday for COVID-19 and the results came back positive. So I feel fine.
Kevin Stitt saying he does not believe he contracted the virus at the president's Tulsa rally, and he has resisted any statewide mask mandate. But in the state of Alabama, a new order requiring them. Violators could face a $500 fine, even jail time.
Folks, the numbers just do not lie.
On the deadliest day yet in Alabama, the governor warning hospitals could soon be overwhelmed.
The numbers and the data over the past few weeks are definitely trending in the wrong direction.
In recent weeks, several governors having a similar change of heart. Victor Oquendo joins us now. And Victor, you're outside the convention center in Miami Beach where a field hospital is currently being set up. Tell us more about those plans.
Lindsay, the field hospital here inside the Miami Beach Convention Center, it is set up and ready to go. No patients inside yet, but it was actually built back in April, and it has been ready since then. All eyes right now are on the hospitals here in Miami-Dade County. ICUs are operating at surge capacity, but they are able to manage. If it gets to the point where they can't, patients might have to come here. Lindsay?
Okay, all right. Victor Oquendo, thanks so much for your reporting. And staying in Florida now, we are joined by Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. Thanks so much for your time, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
So as you know, your state has seen a surge of new cases and reported a record 132 deaths yesterday, 112 more deaths just today. Some Florida mayors have expressed concern that if the rise isn't controlled in the next few weeks, that the state may have to shut down again. In a radio interview yesterday, it sounded like your solution to the surge in Florida was to, quote, lock up the boomers. Is that really a viable option? And does it address the heart of the problem, which is that the younger people are more frequently testing positive?
Younger people are more frequently testing positive, but we're continuing to see more evidence that young people are less likely to be symptomatic, and they're also less likely to spread the disease. So we should not evaluate coronavirus as equally affecting the young and the old, the sick and the well. We have a lot of seniors in the state of Florida, and so my point was that they need to take special care. Folks like my parents who have comorbid conditions and are a little bit older might have to shelter in place longer than young people who are going to school and getting to work in Florida.
You famously wore a gas mask onto the House floor back in March, seemingly making light of this situation. But the head of the CDC said today, if everyone in this nation would just take on a face covering, practice excellent hand hygiene, and be smart about their distancing in crowds, we can bring this outbreak to its knees in 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks. Do you agree with that assessment? And does Florida need to mandate masks in public? I mean, why not take that preventative measure?
I wasn't making light of anything. It's interesting you seem to ascribe my motives. I think I was wearing a mask before it was chic, before it was cool. I think that people should wear masks when they're in public. I certainly do. In the state of Florida, our governor has empowered our mayors and county commissions to issue mask orders if they so choose. And matter of fact, the governor had a press conference today where he said that if your community has analyzed the data and you've got sufficient community spread to warrant a mask order, we'd like you to follow the orders of your local officials.
So that mask was not tongue-in-cheek, just to be clear, because, I mean, there are simple masks that you could wear without going to the extreme of the gas mask.
Well, as you'll remember, in the early days of coronavirus, public health officials actually said, don't go out and buy one of the N95 masks that our healthcare professionals needed at that time. I happened to have a mask of a different kind, and so I wore it. And the fact that I gave an interview the very same day to The Hill where I said, I'm not making light of this. I'm simply wearing a face mask because it's my belief that members of Congress will contract the disease. Unfortunately, my projection turned out to be true. A number of members of Congress have because of the lifestyles we lead. We shake a lot of hands, give a lot of hugs, and travel through a lot of dirty airports. And so I think I was ahead of the curve, but certainly I didn't want to go out and buy a mask that might have been needed by a nurse or another healthcare professional.
And just because I'm curious, so is that the mask, that gas mask that you wear if you're doing errands just routinely during your day?
No, actually, since that time, we've become far more capable as a country ensuring that we have masks for everyone. Matter of fact, in the state of Florida, we have a stockpile of 10 million masks, 15 million gowns and gloves that are available for our healthcare professionals. So we're in a very different place thanks to the leadership of the Trump administration. So now I wear a mask that's a little lighter, but that was the only mask I had at the time, and so I wore it. But I made very clear in my public comments the very same day that the purpose for wearing the mask was a consequence of the way members of Congress travel around the country and interact with people.
Understood. Fair enough. The White House and some conservatives have gone after Dr. Fauci, as you know, for what they say is him being wrong about the virus in the past. But let's listen to some of the president's past statements.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
And we're prepared, and we're doing a great job with it, and it will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away.
So those are just a few examples. Given the inaccuracy of the president's past statements, is it reasonable for the White House then to throw shade on Dr. Fauci and criticize the CDC?
I think that the president's prediction ultimately will come true. Matter of fact, if you look at the recent announcements from the National Institute of Health and Moderna, Inc., we now have the most promising candidate for a vaccine. So I think the president's point is that the coronavirus isn't a dynamic that we'll be dealing with forever, that ultimately we'll find a solution. And until we do, the federal government has to provide provision for our people. And we also have to ensure that there's sufficient guidance so that we can grapple with this disease.
Yeah, just to be fair, though, that first soundbite was that he thought that it was going to go away in April, and you know, clearly it hasn't.
I'm sure we all wish that it would have gone away in April. The president is often an optimist and hopes for the best, but here we've also prepared for the worst by ensuring that no American that needs a ventilator doesn't have a ventilator, and that we're engaging in the type of cooperative collaboration so that we can develop these vaccines. The fact that we've got over 100 vaccine candidates and one that will be given to 30,000 Americans soon to potentially block the virus is very promising and hopefully gets us back to normal, just as the president had hoped.
And just yesterday, Dr. Fauci said that the public should trust respected medical authorities, and he's one of them. Who are you turning to at this point for your guidance?
We get guidance from Dr. Fauci, from Dr. Birx, from our state surgeons general, and even down at the local health, at the local county level here in Florida, we have public health officials who help aggregate the data and contact trace. One thing that we've actually learned from the Department of Health in Florida is that these protests, while themselves in the actual outside active protesting may have some limited impact on the virus's spread, the activities that people engage in before and after the protests, where they're huddled up in an apartment making signs or maybe grabbing pizza after, really have contributed to viral spread. And so we hope that if folks are exercising their First Amendment rights to protest, that they aren't just wearing the mask during the protest, but they also engage in the right social distancing and the right preventative efforts both before and after.
And many states are certainly dealing with the economic fallout of scaling back their reopening. So does Congress need to provide more aid at this point to help state and local governments as well as businesses that are at risk of not making it through the summer? And what's the next step?
I know the administration is in active negotiations now with congressional leadership to try to formulate an additional package for the provision of the American people, our businesses, and any strained institutions as a consequence of coronavirus, including our local governments and our public health systems. But this is not a problem that just money can solve. We also have to have the right policies and strategies. One fix I know the Republicans are fighting hard for is to change the circumstance that allows some folks to arbitrage their unemployment benefits, where it's actually more advantageous economically for a worker to stay out of the workforce than to get in the workforce. So I know Republicans are negotiating for changes to those provisions of law so that we're able to get the right incentive for people to get back to work if it's safe to do so.
Let's turn now to the Black Lives Matter movement. Since the death of George Floyd, of course, we've seen massive protests taking place across the country. Recently, a couple in St. Louis pointed guns at protesters, prompting you to post on Facebook saying, "In Joe Biden's America, your job is illegal. You're locked in your home. Borders don't exist. MS-13 lives next door. And the police aren't coming when the mob arrives. This is all of us." So do you think that that couple pointing guns at peaceful protesters is the best depiction of all Americans?
Well, you've mischaracterized the photograph. I don't see them pointing guns at any other people. I see them standing outside of their home with firearms. I don't see any humans that they're pointed at in the photo that I posted. But I certainly think that there's a dynamic in our country where regular Americans feel like Democrats are trying to pass bills so that police won't arrive. And if they do arrive, that they won't get out of their car and engage in proactive policing. That's not just my critique. That's, in fact, the critique of Rahm Emanuel when he was saying that some of these reforms could potentially limit the ability to have proactive policing. So I think that was the point I was trying to make. And gosh, when you look at Joe Biden's open borders policies and his desire to, I think, make our communities less safe, it's certainly a fitting critique.
And lastly, you've also said that you're concerned that some activists want to, quote, replace America. I know you've raised concerns certainly about statues of founding fathers like George Washington being threatened. But let's focus squarely on the Confederate symbols and statues. Why do you believe that they should remain in public spaces? And recently you referred to it as cultural genocide. Do you still stand by that?
Absolutely. I think that there is an effort right now to fundamentally change America by making us not love America. And that I'm speaking directly to the desire to tear down George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, even, for goodness sakes. But to specifically answer your question about Confederate generals, it's important to understand why those statues were erected in the first place. They were put up as an act of reconciliation after the Civil War. Now, obviously, there were some terrible circumstances that occurred after the Civil War. But when we look at the fact that we actually did stitch our country back together, we are one nation now. There is not a divide between the North and South in America. And when you compare that to civil wars that have occurred throughout the globe, I'm actually pretty proud of the American reconciliation process. So I don't view these statues or these names of bases as testaments to the human beings themselves or even particular moments in time. I think they do mark a historical event of reconciliation and of binding the country back together. And I think that's the appropriate context to view these statues. If you look at the Jefferson Memorial, I think you've got a perfect example about how to memorialize the good work of a man, but also to reflect on the fact that Jefferson was a slave owner and that he understood the fundamental inconsistency of slavery with American way of life. I think he said slavery was like holding the ears of the wolf, where we could neither ride her nor let her go. So providing additional context at any historical monument is good, but trying to whitewash our history and tear down our statutes, I think, deprives us of an understanding of what it took to unify our country after the Civil War.
But I am just curious. We just had the ancestor of Robert E. Lee on recently, and he said that he could understand that there's a painful past, hurtful, some ties and associations and connections with some of the Confederate statues and names. Is there any compromise, or you say to the people who find that offensive, deal with it?
No, I think that the compromise is to add to our history and to enrich our understanding of cultural events, not to act as if they did not occur. And of course it's the case that in America's past there are moments that bring pain to our current understanding of our country and our values. But that very thing could be said about literally any other society in all of human history. There has never been a gathering of humans over a long period of time where there have not been bloody, unfortunate, catastrophic, and tragic events. That doesn't mean you forget about those events. It doesn't mean that you act as if they didn't occur, but you do try to always strive to be a more perfect union. That's what our founders understood. So as we strive to that greater perfection, we shouldn't erase our history. We should seek to better understand it.
Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, we thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And next to the first responders on to the front lines, the virus certainly taking its toll. One of the busiest fire stations in the country. First responders working long shifts, rushing to each COVID call, some not seeing their families for days. ABC's Kaylee Hartung went along with them today in Riverside, California.
Paramedic Bill Titov is the first one through the door, armed in PPE, when Cal Fire Station 71 gets a call.
You keep in the back of your mind that you have a family that you want to go home to and friends you want to go home to.
He hasn't seen his family in 10 days. His station here in Palm Desert, California, one of the busiest in the country, in the extreme heat. Fire Captain Pete Tierney says the N95 masks make it even harder to breathe.
The guys are getting tired, physically tired and mentally tired.
And there's no end in sight.
Not as of right now, no. Sorry.
Every day, there are about a dozen scenes like this.
We just pulled up to this elderly care facility where a woman has signs and symptoms of COVID.
We accompanied their truck rushing the patient here to Eisenhower Hospital. Tonight, there are only 3 ICU beds available.
If we exceed capacity, something has to give, and really then the quality starts to suffer.
And that breaking point is close.
It is very close.
And COVID unit nurse Shannon Asham says the pace is grueling.
They come in faster than we're able to discharge. And unfortunately, these patients turn very quickly.
Do you think there will come a time where you will have to turn COVID patients away?
Well, that's what we're desperately trying to avoid.
And Lindsay, a team of 20 active duty military medical personnel is on its way to Eisenhower Hospital tonight. You heard they need hospital beds, but they also need staff. That staff is strained, and that's what this FEMA team is coming here to do. There was nowhere else for the hospital to turn. Lindsay.
Kaylee, anything that surprised you today?
Well, aside from the heat, these guys here say as long as it's under 110 degrees, it's a good day, and it was 100 here today. But these guys are still dealing with all of the calls that they would deal with any other day outside of a pandemic. Today I saw a car crash. There was a cardiac arrest patient, but they are having to deal with every call as if it is a presumptive COVID call. There was one COVID call early in the day. The second they got that ambulance to the hospital and the gurney was out and into that isolated COVID ward, one of the guys on the team was in the ambulance deconning it immediately. And what do you know? I'm not kidding when I say seconds later, the phone rang again and we were off to another call. Back to back to back. This is one of the busiest fire stations in the country, and I saw that at work today.
And no rest for the weary. Kaylee Hartung, thanks so much for your reporting. Bizarre. That's the word that Dr. Anthony Fauci used today to describe White House seeming to try to discredit him in recent days, including an op-ed this morning by Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro attacking him. The White House says it was unauthorized, but the top infectious disease specialist in the country says the entire effort is a distraction from the critical efforts needed to control the spread of the virus. So how is the president responding? ABC News chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl has the latest.
After enduring days of attacks from White House officials, some named, some not, the usually mild-mannered Dr. Anthony Fauci today said enough is enough.
Let's stop this nonsense and figure out how can we get our control over this now.
The latest shot from the White House, Peter Navarro, a man who advises the president on trade but has no medical experience whatsoever, published a short article in USA Today saying, quote, Anthony Fauci has been wrong about everything I have interacted with him on.
I can't explain Peter Navarro. He's in a world by himself, so I don't even want to go there.
Today, the president, who has also criticized Dr. Fauci, distanced himself from Navarro's words.
Well, he made a statement representing himself. He shouldn't be doing that. No, I have a very good relationship with Anthony.
This comes after the White House press office distributed to reporters a document critical of Fauci, and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications, Dan Scavino, one of the president's very closest advisors, posted a cartoon mocking Fauci on Facebook. Fauci, who continues to serve in the president's coronavirus task force, called the attacks bizarre.
If you talk to reasonable people in the White House, they realize that was a major mistake on their part because it doesn't do anything but reflect poorly on them.
And he pointed out it undermines the government's effort to deal with the pandemic.
It distracts from what I would hope would be the common effort of getting this thing under control rather than this back and forth distraction, which just doesn't make any sense.
It also doesn't make any sense to the top Republican in the Senate, who had this to say today.
What's your level of confidence in Dr. Fauci at this point?
Total.
Total confidence there from Senator McConnell. Jonathan Karl joins us now. And John, we heard Dr. Fauci say there that this is just a distraction from dealing with the actual pandemic. So is the president, is the White House, are either of them offering any game plan for how they're trying to control this rise in cases and also deaths?
Well, the coronavirus task force continues to meet regularly. Dr. Fauci is part of that, continue to have conference calls with the governors, tracking all of this. But the bottom line is there really is no new plan to deal with this latest surge in coronavirus cases across the country, across much of the country. In fact, the president has been having events virtually every day about, it seems, almost any topic but the pandemic. He has not addressed this. And when he has addressed the pandemic at all, it has been to talk about what a great job his administration has done, not to outline any kind of a new plan to deal with the new rise in cases that we're seeing.
And there was also a development today in how hospital data is reported to the federal government. Explain what happened with that.
This was a directive that said hospitals should send their information on coronavirus patients directly to the Department of Health and Human Services instead of to the CDC, which they had been doing. There are some concerns that have been raised about what that means about how the information will be handled and whether it will be shared. But Dr. Redfield, the head of the CDC, said today that he is confident that the CDC will continue to have access to all of that information.
All right, Jonathan Karl, thanks so much. A warning tonight for those scrolling through Twitter. Watch out for verified accounts of celebrities promising to double any donations of Bitcoin. It's part of an apparent hack of several prominent figures, including former President Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Kanye West, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and even companies like Uber, Cash App, and Apple. The accounts have posted similar messages saying that they are giving back and that all Bitcoin sent to the address below will be doubled. Twitter has responded saying, we are aware of a security incident impacting accounts on Twitter. We are investigating and taking steps to fix it. We will update everyone shortly. Next, to the latest disturbing police-involved incident caught on camera. This time it shows two police officers in Oklahoma tasing a man more than 50 times. He later died, and the officers are now facing murder charges. Marcus Moore has the latest, and we must warn you, the video is disturbing.
Non-compliance is going to get you tased.
Tonight, newly released video captures the violent arrest.
Did that get you?
Two Wilson, Oklahoma police officers allegedly shooting 28-year-old Jared Lakey more than 50 times with stun guns.
Put your hands behind your back.
The disturbing body camera footage from July 4th last year. Lakey's family attorney releasing the 11-minute video, which is part of a civil lawsuit. It shows officers Joshua Taylor and Brandon Dingman confronting Lakey. The incident started with a 911 call about a man running down a street yelling. When met by officers, an Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations report says Lakey refused to comply with their commands.
We had 3 tasers deployed at this time.
The Bureau of Investigation said the officers shot their stun guns multiple times. Court records, however, claim the stun guns were fired a combined total of more than 50 times. Authorities said as officers arrested him, Lakey became unresponsive. He died 2 days later.
And we are joined now by Marcus Moore. So what are the charges that these officers are facing, and are they still on the force?
Well, Lindsay, we understand from the clerk's office in Oklahoma that the officers have been removed from the force, and tonight they are facing charges of second-degree murder in Lakey's death. Lindsay.
Marcus Moore reporting in for us tonight. Thanks, Marcus. And now to ABC's exclusive interview with the president's niece, Mary Trump. She has just published a scathing new memoir of her uncle. President Trump's brother at one point went to court to block the book and prevent her from doing any interviews. ABC's chief anchor George Stephanopoulos sat down with Mary Trump after a judge ruled she could not be stopped from speaking out. Her book is a deep dive into her past with the Trump family, but she says right now she's focused on what the country should do.
What's the single most important thing you think the country needs to know about your uncle?
He's utterly incapable of leading this country, and it's dangerous to allow him to do so.
Based on what you see now or what you saw then?
Based on what I've seen my entire adult life.
You have one potentially explosive allegation in the book, at least one.
Mm-hmm.
And you write that when the president was trying to transfer from Fordham to Penn, he had someone else, a man named Joe Shapiro, take his SAT.
Yes.
This was 1964. How do you know that?
I've been told this by people in my family. I am absolutely confident that it's true. I'm happy to finally to be able to speak about it. I also know that it was not the Joe Shapiro people have been focusing on.
So it's, to be clear, it's not Pam Shriver.
No.
Pam Shriver, the widow
Right.
of Joe Shapiro, has come out publicly and said he didn't meet Donald Trump until Penn. There's no way this is true.
Yes, and I feel terrible that she's been subjected to this. Honestly, I wish I could have said something sooner. And I think the only people other than me who can address it are other people in my family, and I look forward to hearing their response to that question.
And you believe other members of your family also know this is true?
Yes.
White House says it's an absurd falsehood.
Of course. They would.
Can you prove it's true?
Can I prove? No, because I'm counting on people I trust who told me this story. So in terms of documentation, no, I can't prove it, but I can certainly say with 100% certainty that I was told this story by a source very close to Donald.
Election night 2016, I think you tweeted out, "It's the worst night of my life."
One of them, yeah.
One of the worst nights of my life. Then why go to the White House in April 2017? You see the president in the Oval Office, and you tell him, don't let them get you down. Did you mean that?
I did, actually. That was 4 months in. He already seemed very strained by the pressures. I didn't mean I want you to keep doing what you're doing and get away with it, and also so much of what has happened since then hadn't yet happened. And I thought his response was actually more enlightening than my statement. And he said, "They won't get me." And so far, looks like he's right.
And if you're in the Oval Office today, what would you say to him?
Resign.
Not mincing any words there. And you can see all of Georgia's exclusive interview with Mary Trump in our next hour tonight, right here on ABC News Live. And when we come back, the grisly murder mystery. The tech CEO murdered inside his apartment and left in bags. What investigators are learning from surveillance footage. The stunning move, the city that decided to apologize for its role in slavery and has agreed to pay reparations. But up next, the confrontation over masks that ended in a deadly police shooting. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. As you likely know, there is a fierce divide in this country over wearing masks, and it has led to some violent confrontations across the country, including one, as Alex Perez reports, that ended in a deadly police shooting.
Tonight, a deadly end to an ordeal that police say started with a dispute over a face mask.
Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon!
Body camera video capturing a Michigan sheriff's deputy shooting a man after he charged at her with a knife. He later died at the hospital. That suspect, authorities say, had earlier stabbed a 77-year-old who confronted him about not wearing a mask.
Wear a mask. Let's get through this together, and hopefully someday we'll be back to normal.
This as the public divide and list of violent encounters over masks grows. This one happening July 5th in Miami. The CDC director saying the virus could be controlled in weeks if people follow the guidelines.
We really embrace masking. We really embrace the social distancing and hand washing. We could bring this outbreak to its knees.
Across the country, only 2 states, Iowa and South Dakota, have no mask mandate of any kind. Walmart and Sam's Club today announcing customers beginning Monday must wear face coverings, joining a growing list of companies including Best Buy, Costco, and Starbucks, now requiring them in all stores.
And Lindsay, at least 24 states going even further, requiring a mask not only when in a business, but also asking residents to wear one whenever outside. Lindsay?
Alex Perez, thanks so much. Still ahead here on Prime, we are tracking some promising news in the global effort to find a vaccine. From farm to table, how the pandemic is changing how we get food and why that may alter one of America's oldest jobs. But today is tax day. Millions filing their returns as state budgets suffer. How big are expected budget shortfalls? We'll take a look coming up by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day from the man who was the White House press secretary for 11 days. Still unclear if Kanye is or isn't running. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Today is officially tax day after a 3-month delay due to the pandemic. As the government collects its money, we take a look at how a period of economic expansion has come to an end and the expected shortfalls in government revenue to come by the numbers. State governments are expected to see a roughly $75 billion shortfall in fiscal year 2020 because of the pandemic, according to analysis by Brookings Tax Policy Center. And they'll fall short by another $125 billion in fiscal year 2021. According to the same study. Last January, all 50 states were projecting solid revenue growth for the remainder of the 2020 budget year, but that all changed once the virus hit our shores. States are now forecasting a 6% drop in these tax revenues, according to Brookings. And in just 1 month, May of 2020, sales tax revenues fell by 21% as consumers spent less, according to data from 46 states. Hawaii is facing the largest expected decline in tax revenues due to the huge drop in tourism, as you can imagine. And states that rely heavily on energy taxes, such as Alaska, New Mexico, and Wyoming, they're also expected to be hit hard, both by the pandemic and collapse of oil and gas prices. We still have a lot to get to here on Prime. Rapper Megan Thee Stallion speaking out about a weekend violent incident that she says ended with her being shot. News tonight on the health of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and our conversation with the new president of the University of California Universities, how they plan to reopen. But first, here's some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
The coronavirus outbreak now on the rise, with 41 states reporting an increase in cases. The governor of one of those testing positive, Oklahoma's Kevin Stitt. He's isolating at home.
I feel fine.
In Alabama, Governor Kay Ivey issued a mandate. Face masks have to be worn in public starting tomorrow, saying new cases are high and ICU beds are nearly full statewide.
There are some other more restrictive actions that we could take, such as closing things back down. but I don't want to go there unless there are absolutely no other options available.
The world's biggest retailer says starting Monday, anyone who goes into a Walmart or Sam's Club will be required to wear a mask. But it doesn't appear masks will be required to visit the Statue of Liberty or Ellis Island. The National Park Service announcing today a phased reopening of both beginning Monday.
Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is out of the hospital tonight. The 87-year-old justice is now home less than 48 hours after she was admitted for a possible infection. A spokeswoman says she's home and doing well tonight.
A gruesome murder in New York City. Police searching for the killer of a tech entrepreneur inside his luxury Manhattan condo.
One of the neighbors heard screaming and very loud noises when this happened.
The 33-year-old man murdered and dismembered in his own apartment, his limbs and head stuffed in bags in his living room. Police sources say there is video of the victim, a tech entrepreneur, with his killer in the man's living room. Sources say it appeared the killer worked hard to cover his tracks, but perhaps was interrupted or got spooked before he could leave.
Police now identifying the victim as Fahim Saleh, CEO of Gokada, a ride-sharing startup.
An extraordinary move. Asheville, North Carolina's City Council apologizing for the city's historic role in slavery and discrimination, voting to give reparations to them and their descendants.
It's simply not enough to remove statues.
But instead of direct payments, the unanimously passed resolution will make investments in areas where Black residents face disparities. Amid outcry and Viacom cutting business ties over Nick Cannon's controversial comments, celebrities and former co-workers are rallying behind the star. Diddy showing support, Dwayne Wade too, and his former co-stars of the Viacom-owned show Wild 'N Out all expressing support for what he said on his podcast, Cannon's Class.
Accused of perpetuating an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
The Rothschilds, centralized banking, the bloodlines that control everything even outside of America.
Taking to social media Monday to explain, saying, anyone who knows me knows that I have no hate in my heart nor malice intentions. But Cannon stopped short of apologizing, instead saying, I hold myself accountable for this moment and take full responsibility.
Megan Thee Stallion set the record straight over reports of being shot. TMZ first reported on Sunday police pulled over her and her boyfriend Tory Lanez, arresting him on a gun charge. The hitmaker took to Instagram, writing, I suffered gunshot wounds as a result of a crime that was committed against me and done with the intention to physically harm me. She went on to explain police drove her to the hospital for surgery, where she says she'll make a full recovery. The 25-year-old went on to call it a blessing in disguise.
Welcome back. The pandemic is only the latest thing to alter the food supply chain. Environmental concerns and changing consumer habits have impacted the farm industry and also given rise to new industries like alternative meats. Tonight, we wanted to take a closer look at the beef industry, specifically how these dramatic shifts could alter what ends up on our plate. Our Matt Gutman has this report.
On horseback, Mike Jones herds his cows and calves on his ranch in Dardanelle, Arkansas. He considers himself an old-school rancher. 5 generations before him tended lands, raised cattle. It's a family business.
My wife spent 3 days trying to save a calf, everything she could do, and every medicine, stayed up with it all night. My daughters can do what most boys can't.
It's a life that he loves.
I'm just thankful, thank God, that I get to come out here and do this every day.
But it's come with hardship. Jones and his family say they're fighting for their livelihoods.
We've lost land in the past, lost ranches, lost farms. It takes a toll on your family if you're not pretty tough.
He says his son likely won't follow in his footsteps. There just isn't enough money in the business anymore.
We're just trying to keep our heads above water.
And when the pandemic hit, the bottom fell out. The entire food supply chain was affected.
Everything kind of came to a halt, and the cattle kind of got backed up in the feed yards where we sell our cattle, and the feed yard operators, the cattle prices fall, but you saw the prices in the grocery stores go absolutely through the roof. These beef processors are the ones that's making the money.
Beef wholesale prices hit a record high in April, spiking nearly 20% in just 1 week. But slaughterhouses, where workers are often stationed shoulder to shoulder, couldn't keep up. They, too, weren't immune from the virus. In April and May alone, about 16,000 meatpacking workers were infected with the virus. Nearly 90% of them were racial and ethnic minorities. People like 21-year-old Michael, who contracted the virus at the Smithfield pork plant in South Dakota.
I was struggling, so I was breathing so hard and getting close to other guys who know the job already, so I kept on moving around.
Smithfield, South Dakota plant had to temporarily shut down. Eventually, over 1,000 of its employees at this plant would become infected. The fixes advised by the CDC would later slow production. In all, dozens of slaughterhouses around the country were temporarily closed due to COVID outbreaks. But over the past 6 weeks, meatpacking facilities have bounced back. That said, cow and bull production was up 7% in the week of June 13th as compared to last year. But Jones says he hasn't seen that increase in demand because he says he's also competing with imported beef.
Say they're coming from South America at 30 cents a pound, and we're trying to sell ours even at 90 cents or a dollar, and we're not breaking even. Well, they're eventually going to get it to where we have no ranches left here in the USA.
And now changing eating habits and a greater awareness of the environmental impact of beef production is potentially threatening the single product Jones has ever had.
And so instead of the cows coming in, it's, in this case, soybeans that are brought in.
Yeah. We were granted exclusive access at the Impossible Foods factory in Oakland, California, where soybeans are transformed into raw-looking and tasting meat.
I mean, it tastes exactly like a burger, like any other burger.
Meat alternative sales have skyrocketed this year. Sales were up nearly 250% just in the 12 weeks ending on May 23rd.
So you're basically making just as much as you possibly can. We have hungry customers and we have to keep them fed.
Turning legumes into a product that so closely resembles meat requires some modern-day alchemy, but nothing gets killed and there's no gore, said the company's CEO, Pat Brown. Now, this is a tour you would rarely get in a real meatpacking plant in the middle of a pandemic where animals are killed, the carcasses dehaired and then butchered. The rise of alternative meat is partly due to meat shortages during the height of the pandemic and partly because of the greater scrutiny of conditions inside slaughterhouses for workers and the animals. That, according to Pat Brown of Impossible Foods. He says his customers are not just vegetarians, but people who are concerned about the environmental impact of beef consumption.
If you replace a pound of cow-derived beef with a pound of Impossible beef, you reduce your greenhouse gas footprint by the equivalent of the average daily commute in the U.S., 36 miles in a typical American car, or the equivalent of 92 miles flying in a passenger jet.
But some critics warn that both Impossible and Beyond Burgers are heavily processed.
In general, what we understand about the human diet and about the way that humans have evolved, ultra-processed food tends to be much less good for you than the whole foods alternatives.
But for consumers who want to be more conscious of their environmental footprint, the meat alternative is alluring. Impossible Foods boasts that pound for pound, its carbon footprint is 89% smaller than that of a real beef burger. But ranchers say they get a bad rap when it comes to their impact on the environment.
So much of the concern about the environment is really not directed at the cattle industry properly. It's an easy target because there's relatively few ranchers as compared to the rest of the population. But the ranchers have for centuries been stewards of the land and have cared for their air, land, and water.
But Pat Brown insists he's not after the ranchers, but what you could call the beef industrial complex.
You've said yourself that your goal is to kill the meat industry.
I would say yes, and I want to do it the old-fashioned way by fair competition in the free market, and basically not kneecapping ranchers, but inventing better foods that do a better job of delivering what consumers want.
Back on the ranch, Jones doesn't see what has been an indelible part of American culture disappearing anytime soon.
I don't think the generation of ranchers are going to die, no matter if it's my ranch or another ranch.
Matt Gutman, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Our thanks to Matt Gutman. And we now turn to universities and how they plan to operate this fall. So we'd like to bring in Dr. Michael Drake, the incoming president of the University of California school system, one of the largest in the world. And he is the first black president in the system's 152-year history. We so appreciate your time tonight, Doctor.
Great to be with you.
So you are charged with keeping tens of thousands of students safe. We know that college and high school students across the country, we're seeing them go to parties not wearing masks, and with some of the highest rates of positive tests in the country. How do you plan to keep your campus safe? Not just the students, but by extension, the faculty as well.
Well, I think you mentioned something very important. That is the real importance of wearing masks during this pandemic. It's critical for everyone, both to help transmit and then try to keep oneself from being infected. So wearing a mask is the most important thing that we can do as a country today. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second is the things that you've heard about social distancing are critically important. Hand washing, those things must be done. And we will have to work closely with our students and everyone to make sure they're adhering to these standards. It's a question of what makes good public health sense, but also if people are not able to adhere to these standards, we won't be able to continue with our activities. And so it's going to be critical that everyone do their best to adhere to these standards. Wear a mask. Stay safe.
And you have the unique experience of also being a medical doctor. How do you anticipate that that is going to combine the medical role with the education role as well?
Well, I think of things, the two parts of that equation are things I think of all the time. And so we're really committed to safety as we look at what our activities are going to be in the fall. And it helps me with my medical training and background as I'm discussing these things with public health officials. And it helped us to make our decisions at the Ohio State University before I left, and it's helping us now.
With this economic downturn, the state of California is certainly facing major revenue shortfalls, and your school system could lose hundreds of millions in funding. How concerned are you about that? And are there programs that you're already looking at considering cutting?
Well, the economic fallout from this pandemic is something that all of us feel across the country and around the world. It's quite serious. And again, making ourselves safe is the best way that we can get our economy going again. But we can't get the economy going again until we can make ourselves safe. And those two things are in great tension. We at the university, like everyone, have to mind our budgets. We are trimming every place we can trim while doing everything we can to protect the core mission and to protect the pathway forward for our students during this critical time.
And you've certainly been at the forefront of diversity and inclusion for many years. You've been described as being a black man, how you've been treated and stopped by police many times. What are your plans as far as tackling issues surrounding race on campus?
One of the things that's most important about our campuses is that they're great places for people from different backgrounds to come together and to discuss the most important issues to them as individuals, to our cities and states, and to our nation. And the issues of diversity and inclusion are critically important. They have been for my whole career. We've worked hard at the University of California in the past to have some of the nation's leading programs in diversity and inclusion, and we intend fully to be leaders in this area going forward. But it's hard work for all of us every day to make sure that we work to help right the wrongs that have been a part of this country since its founding.
I want to go back to the beginning with my last question and just revisit the idea of coronavirus. And is there a point where you would say, everybody, we're packing back up and we're just going back to remote virtual learning?
Yeah, I mean, our first priority is to be safe. And so in everything we do, we have to be sure that we can be reasonably safe. And if we were at a place where we felt that it was not safe to continue, then we would alter our behavior until we felt that was the case. We did this in March when we went to virtual education, even before we had cases on campus. So as we look to the fall, if we're not sure that we're in a place where we can manage the health and safety of our community, then we'll change our behavior.
Dr. Michael Drake, we want to thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Very nice to be with you. Take care. Stay safe.
And next, reopening schools and businesses safely will, of course, become much easier to manage once there's a safe vaccine. And there have been some promising developments on that front this week, as our Bob Woodruff explains.
Another landmark week in the race for a vaccine. One of the companies leading the charge, Moderna, just released what they say is promising data from their phase 1 human trials. This, as the World Health Organization says, there are now 23 vaccines that have advanced to human trials.
What we've learned from these phase 1 data are a number of things. First, we've demonstrated that we have a vaccine that can educate the immune system to generate the right kind of an immune response, that is, neutralizing antibodies. The reason that's important is because that's the kind of an immune response that any vaccine is shooting for.
Moderna claims this new data has shown their vaccine is safe, but noted mild side effects.
No pressure, right?
Your arm hurts a little bit when you get the shot, and you may experience some flu-like symptoms that are generally mild to moderate in nature and are transient. Think of it as flu-like symptoms. You can get a bad headache, you can get fever, you can feel some muscle aches. By and large, this is gone the next day or so. And if that's what you'd have to experience in order to ensure your immune system can recognize this virus and be protected from COVID-19, wouldn't that benefit be worth it?
Research out of the UK suggests that antibodies caused by the infection may fade over time, a potential wrinkle in vaccine development.
You hear people talk about these neutralizing antibodies, and it's something that is still an emerging area of science. When we get infected, our body's immune system generates these antibodies that have the ability to block the virus from infecting cells.
Though research is ongoing, experts say any vaccine could require an additional shot sometime after the initial vaccination.
So you can ask me, okay, is your vaccine still going to be protective in a year? And the answer is, I don't know. But here's the deal. Even if the vaccine only is protective for a year, with the current rate of infection and what we see in the communities right now across this country, even that would be a tremendous step forward.
Moderna's vaccine is on track to enter the next stage of human trials, along with some of its competitors. However, Moderna says the world needs more than one success story.
I only have two competitors in this race, the virus and the clock. We need every vaccine that can make it across the finish line to succeed here, because not a single company has the answer on their own in terms of capacity over time that's needed to achieve what humanity is facing right now.
Moderna hopes its vaccine will be ready for emergency use by the fall. This is Bob Woodruff, tracking the race for a vaccine.
Our thanks to Bob. And when we return, violinists across the country coming together to pay tribute to one of their own. Finally tonight, the movements within the movement. Demands for justice are playing out differently across the country.
Music is such a powerful force. It can be a balm, it can be comforting, it can agitate folks, it can support movements.
Instead of marching, masked musicians at this park in Chicago are protesting through song.
If there are ways to use music to advance those causes, to create a more peaceful and harmonious, world, that's what we're all trying to do.
leaning in as they play Lean on Me in honor of Elijah McClain, the 23-year-old who enjoyed playing the violin and died last year after police detained him as he was walking home from a Colorado convenience store.
So we're here today as fellow musicians to lift up his memory through the medium that he loved most, and that was the medium of music.
Violin vigils are taking place across the country, in part inspired by this scene in Aurora, Colorado, the very police department under investigation for McClain's death.
No!
Police in riot gear confronting the crowd, protesters with their bows and police with their batons. The crowd forming a barrier with their bodies to protect the violinists so they could play on uninterrupted. From New York to Chicago to Cincinnati. All ages, all races, all on the same page, making beautiful music together.
We've come to this place to share love and to support and to talk about Elijah and what his life means to this movement.
With concert halls closed, some classically trained musicians now have a new stage and new motivation.
He was a wonderful musician, and so that's a voice that we no longer get to hear.
There have been a dozen such movements just in the past 2 weeks. Artists using their stringed instruments to tug at our heartstrings, reminding us not just of the power of music, but reminding us of the life that was lost.
Power of music. And before we go tonight, our image of the day. Take a look at this artist with her fists raised in the air, mimicking the statue she reportedly created. This Black Lives Matter statue in Bristol, England, replaced a statue that once honored a former slave owner. It's unclear if it will be allowed to stay there. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.